Well, thank you, James. And I'm suddenly find myself here in the north of England, out of London. And I'm now being joined by Mark Galvin, who is Senior Product Director with Infobip. We've heard from Natalia and Visa. I'm now going to hear from Mark. Now, you think of anything as a service, whether it's software as a service, cloud communications as a service, communications platform as a service. That is Mark's bag of tricks. So you're in the right hands today to hear all about how important a role data plays in the future of omnichannel messaging. Mark, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, James. Thank you for having me here.
Well, no, great that you could join me. Now, I just talked about the important role data plays, and we've been hearing that from Vicha and Natalia. But how important a role does data really play in the future? Because this is what I'm here to talk about with you, really. It's the future of omnichannel. Omnichannel can do for companies all around. And so how important is it, number one? And number two, what's the impact you think it will have on real companies if they put data front and center?
It's a very good question. I think personally, from my perspective, I think data will need to become the North Star for all service providers within the business messaging space, because a lot of people are focused on sending the message, but today it's not just about sending the message. It's about creating a value exchange with customers in the moment that matters most to them. And really, to do that, it needs to be driven by data. So several things will need to happen in order to facilitate that. Firstly, companies are going to have to put data front and center. And to do that, they're going to have to adopt what we call a first data strategy. So that means that they're going to have to start capturing a customer's explicit preferences. And that is like, their preference on channel, better understanding of their interests. And that has to be driven by the signals, those blueprints that customers leave when they interact with our brand, whether that be from a visit to the website, contact center, whether it be the way they interact with a message, a business message that's been sent to them. All of that gives away certain signals. And to gather that first-party data, the really big part is brands are going to have to start to be really transparent with the customers and their consumers so that they understand the value of the value exchange from giving them that data. So for instance, if you were to offer up and be transparent and say, we use your data for these purposes, we can improve the offers that we provide to you, we can make your communications more relevant, then people are more likely to volunteer that data forward. And the challenge is that if you look at the way traditional business messaging has worked, it's used data, but not necessarily good data. And what I mean by that is take first-time purchase data. We're at Christmas. Let's use something quite seasonal. We're in the Christmas period, right? So imagine like later on today, after I finished speaking to you, I might go on and I might do some Christmas shopping. And in that Christmas shopping, I might go and buy a pink fluffy pair of slippers for my mother for Christmas, for instance. Now that might be from a vendor that I've never purchased from before. So the only thing they know about me is my name. They know the address that they sent it to, the billing address, know that I bought pink fluffy slippers. So when they go and build their customer segment and they go, give me all the people made a purchase in the last 3 months, and then they start to throw things like product recommendations at me or other information that might be tailored to me, tailoring it around a product that's not even for me. So they're using transactional data. Another analogy is like, imagine that I go out for a pizza with a couple of friends and, I'm the meat feast guy. You can probably tell I look like a guy that, but I've got vegan friends, right? I've got vegetarian friends. I've got pescatarian friends, you name it, right? So we're going to have all these different types of pizzas, but a traditional segmentation would go, give me all the people in the last sort of week, 2 weeks that have purchased a vegan pizza. Now, if I picked up the bill, I got my friends to give me the cash element for their element, they might see me as the vegan, but it doesn't represent me. So the challenge with transactional data is, whilst it can be useful, particularly if people repeat buy the same products, where it's not is for that first time purchase where you're trying to drive, relevancy with that individual. So it's really important to be able to use these signals in a way that you can translate that and contextual relevance. I read a study recently by Accenture And there were two figures in it, which I found, quite alarming. And it's something which really kind of drives this home. The first is that they said 83% of customers or consumers are willing to share their data to create a more personalized experience. So then it comes down to, the transparency of what you're using the data for and the value it's going to offer. They also said that 91% of consumers are more likely to shop with brands that offer personalized recommendations and provide content that's relevant to them. So it doesn't matter whether it's your website, whether it's when they're engaging with an agent at the contact center, whether it's a business message that they've received, whether it be marketing or operational, there has to be that kind of value exchange. It has to be relevant, it has to be in context. So for me, data drives contextual personalization, and contextual personalization is absolutely essential in delivering messages that add value for the recipient. And therefore, I think companies need to be better at reading those data signals, the digital footprints that customers leave behind, and they need to be able to use those to better engage them in context. And from a future perspective, I think it will fundamentally shift. I mean, I'm talking about first-party data today. What we're talking about tomorrow is zero-party data. That's not just being able to capture data from individuals and get them to provide more information so that you can move from implicit or implied personalization to explicit personalization based on what they're giving you. Zero-party data will get to the point where we have what I'm kind of calling consumer-empowered profiles, where the individual will get a message, and you might, for example, see something on that message which they can click and it goes, this is why you received this message. And if we've got something wrong, like those pink fluffy slippers actually weren't me, I'm more interested in tech and gadgets and whatever it might be, I can update that. So it will be a consumer managed customer profile, not a brand managed customer profile. And it means that the data I give you are more explicit. Now, if you offer me that value exchange, I would spend an hour filling out a survey if it means that every message you send to me is going to be relevant. And I would probably take the time to do it. And I think a lot of brands will find if they put some of these sort of data-centric processes in place, that a lot of their customers and the people they engage with will take the time to give them that information and help them to be more relevant, which will drive more business for them.
Well, I think you and I are both of a vintage here in the UK. We know how strong, for example, the supermarket sector is here in the UK. And those of us here in the UK will be familiar with a rather large supermarket beginning with T, and they were the first ones to implement their club card, which is their loyalty card. But the whole basis of that is the data. So exactly that. So if I happen to be purchasing goods at the supermarket, which weren't actually for me, so I happened to be doing the weekly shop for my mum or friend or something like that, you can imagine just how groundbreaking that was when there was nothing else in the market. It was truly groundbreaking, and it moved things along so much here in the UK. But that was several decades ago now. Things have moved on. The game has truly, truly moved on. And you're right. Today as well, we're given there's so many channels and there's so many ways and means of purchasing from the same organization as well. Those organizations have got to get that customer experience right, because otherwise, if you keep getting targeted with pink this, pink that, whatever it may be, you're soon going to get very, very tired. And I've personally seen it as well. A number of organizations, when it actually comes to the opt-out side of things, it's opt out of absolutely everything. There's no, hang on, do you want to opt out of just email but retain SMS, for example? It's very, very harsh. So there's a real risk you can actually lose a decent chunk of your loyal clients by doing that. So the data side of things, I get that. It's totally, totally important. Now, do you have any real life concrete examples of where companies weren't actually leveraging this data properly, resulting in you receiving poor customer experience beyond the pink fluffy slipper side of things?
Yeah, I can actually draw on several experiences I have myself. I think the one thing we can obviously say is that at one time during the pandemic, we've all had experiences where the way that brands interact with us has changed, right? So, and in fact, the one thing that was evident to me because of the line of work I'm in is looking at these programs that they have, these automated programs, which are designed to really engage customers. But the fact that, you know, they all failed due to the lack of data and the rules that they put behind those programs. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, we all experienced shortages of some sort from a consumer product perspective during lockdown. You know, some of us without toilet roll. Even worse, wine.
Don't know why, toilet roll, pasta and rice. Those are the three things in here in the UK. Yeah. Yeah,
toilet roll was bad. Wine was worse though, right? So like the moment the wine was off the shelf, that was it. That was when myself and my wife were more stressed. But the reality is that, you know, there were shortages of certain products, and I've got quite an old geriatric, bless him, 9-year-old English Springer Spaniel, and he's on a fairly special diet now. He's getting older. It's low fat and lacks this and lacks that and doesn't have grain in it and you name it. And it's quite an expensive product, and I buy it in the same place online. I've been buying it for the last 2 years for him, and I didn't bulk buy or panic buy anything, but I was getting down to the last couple of cans, and I got to the website to order the food from them. And it's from the usual supplier I always go to. It's always a good price. It's, you know, I never had a problem with delivery. And I go online, and as people were panic buying from the supermarkets, they'd moved that spend to online. And even this food that you would not buy for your dog unless he had to eat this specific diet was sold out. And I go on the website, I go in, it's out of stock. And, you know, the biscuits are out of stock, the wet food's out of stock. There's no options. So I leave the but I desperately need this food. So I'm in that unusual situation where I've got my email on one screen and I've got the site on one screen, and I'm now searching in Google. I'm trying to find somewhere else with a specific brand that I'm looking for. And my email goes, and I open the email, and in that email, cart campaign. We've all had those, right? You go onto the website, they know who you are, they know that you've either added something to basket or you viewed a product and you browsed and you abandoned. And it's great. I mean, it's an amazing technique for regaining lost revenues. Is the product's out of stock, and I've got this email in my inbox at a point where I'm panic trying to find somewhere where I can get this product. And I've got this email going, oh, did you miss something? Come back and add this to your cart. And I'm like, this isn't a great customer experience. So whilst the program is a good program, they hadn't adapted the business rules and the data behind it to make that relevant for certain contexts. And I think the pandemic certainly showed how it's really difficult for brands. They didn't really review the programs that they had. I mean, I'll give you another example. I didn't receive a single birthday message. Every year I get at least 8-10 birthday messages with offers from brands. During the pandemic, the one time I was a June baby, right? So I was one of the first earliest people, like from the first lockdown, that had a birthday in lockdown. And when it came across, I didn't get a single birthday message. In the year that I got less birthday cards than ever, because some people couldn't get out to the shops to get them, I also received nothing from any of the brands. And I even saw instances on Twitter where made birthday offers to people, but they had to be people were shielding, or the stores were closed and they expired. So again, I did see some examples where brands, for example, offered gift cards to people with no expiry date, so that they could give them to people, and when the shops reopened, they could go, or they could use them online. And it's the way that brands kind of adapted the offers, an element. But there's a lot of that around data, around using information in a way that they could kind of pivot it. So these are kind of examples of sort of good and bad customer experiences that I kind of saw. And the fact that a lot of the automated programs that a lot of people had in play and just leave lights out in the background hadn't really used data to make sure they adapt when certain things happen, such as, you know, low stock or something being sold out. Now, what would have been a good experience there is that the email in my inbox had a link in it, so that I could register, for example, for an SMS message, so I get an instant alert the moment it's back in stock. Now, that would have been a truly great omni-channel customer experience versus an email telling me to go back and buy a product that they didn't have. You know, and instead I found another company, and I've been with that company since the beginning of the first lockdown. So we're talking like 12 to 18 months now, right? So I've now been, and I've not gone back because of it. So I think
There's
really
nothing, so this is a great example. So there's nothing that former supplier can do to get you back to them.
No. I think from my perspective, you know, and maybe it's because I come from the tech space, but the way that I see it is, the same as every consumer today, I'm connected. I'm always on my mobile, and I expect those brands to be connected. And from a channel perspective, you know, the experience I get, I expect to be joined up. And that email that wasn't in stock to tell me to come back and buy it, for me, was a disconnected user experience, and it's one that I would look negatively on that brand, and I probably wouldn't return. And
but Mark, what happens if they're a smaller brand? So they're not a massive company with massive deep pockets, super tech heavy, loads of development personnel, etc., and they were in that situation. Do you think in the future, or looking at omnichannel now today, has there been a real democratization taking place where actually omnichannel solutions, so what you think that business should have done, being able to pivot and offer that SMS option when the product was actually back in stock, is that something realistic now for small and medium-sized businesses to have a solution like that, which is fairly easy to manipulate on the fly, given the situation happened with COVID that was totally unexpected? Is that in the future you think or even today, something definitely possible?
That is a really interesting point, because when people on the channel, they always think enterprise.
Yeah.
And actually, some of the brands that I'm talking about were not large brands. And actually, some of the experiences that I had during the pandemic were better from the smaller brands. I think if you look at the solutions that are out there today, particularly, you know, I can talk from an Infobip perspective. Although we offer sort of programmatic solutions so that people can integrate channels and messaging into their business applications, there are also software solutions available off the shelf. So the way that the solutions and stuff are costed, it's actually affordable for all, because it's done on a scale of volume, right? So the more contacts you have, the more customers you have, the more you would expect to spend. So the smaller brand has a smaller customer base. They don't have to have a huge budget to start to implement some of these strategies. And if they pick a supplier that has that kind of breadth of channels, it's very easy for them to adopt it. So actually, you know, if you look at the kind of SMB and mid market, it probably represents more businesses in the world than it does the enterprises. There's much less of them. So it, you know, from that perspective, anyone that isolates the enterprise or targets the enterprise solely and doesn't provide those solutions for those smaller companies. I mean, let's face it, we're all a startup at one point, right? We all started as a smaller business before we grew to an enterprise. So it's a really valuable point that, you know, omni-channel is important for everyone. And actually, I think for some of the smaller brands, they're also more agile. It's much more easy for them to adopt. And some of these things could be small micro steps, like that example campaign you gave where I said, you know, rather than that, sending an email with a link, that link gives you an instant SMS. We know the average SMS message is read within 7 seconds or something daft, because it's a fast channel to get the message to someone. You don't need a mobile app installed to do mobile push or something. It's a fast channel. That would have been a really good effort, and the cost of implementing something like that would have been negligible, especially given the fact that they might likely generate a sale. And for that customer, that would have been the difference probably within me staying with them or not staying with them, because the trust, you know, by the way in which they approach me.
I think that's really good, because that is a myth out there, that omni-channel, genuine omni-channel communication, because I see this time and again. I've seen this time and again at MEF events and personally out and about and interfacing with companies. You have so many companies that say, hey, we can do omni-channel communications, but you dig a little deeper and it's not, it's multi-channel. Omni-channel is a totally different proposition. To truly engage with the customers and to drive that loyalty, you have to have an omni-channel offering. So I think it's clear from speaking with you today that omni-channel is something available to small and medium-sized organizations. And I think it's also important to get across that we're not just talking about enterprises, for-profit companies. It doesn't matter what your organization does. You could be a charity, you could be anything. Having omni-channel communications in place for your customers, for your donors, or even for your team members as well. Let's not forget internal communications within organizations as well is something that's relevant to organizations of all sizes. That makes sense to me.
And just one point on that as well. Like, for me, it's not about the company. It's around the agility of the company and the company's appetite to shift from a sales focus to a customer focus. I mean, from sales centricity to customer centricity. If there's an appetite for the latter, then there's an appetite, and there's a real opportunity for them to integrate omnichannel. If you take the abandoned cart campaign, that was a sales-centric approach. If you take the email with a link to let you know when it's back in stock, that's a customer-centric approach. It's very subtle in terms of the differences, but any company that wants to be more focused on the customer, they're right for implementing some of these omnichannel strategies.
Thanks. Okay, well, Mark, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you about what the future for omnichannel holds. And my conversation with yourself has really cemented the whole fact for me that omnichannel is absolutely for everyone. And at the end of the day, if you ask customers how they want to be communicated and with, and what they want to receive from you, what offers, then just by doing those two simple things, that's making it customer-centric. So just ask your customers and give your customers ultimately exactly what they want. And it seems that with the help of data and a good omnichannel solution, you can't go far. So Mark, thank you very much for joining me today. And a real pleasure having you with me here at MEF Connects Omnichannel 2021. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for watching, and thanks, James, for recording that video earlier. As we know, James is sadly got COVID, although he's asymptomatic, so he's not poorly. But he had to do that interview earlier in the week, and it was a delight to be able to screen it today. And we've still got sort of 8 minutes until the next session, so we thought we'd bring on two of Mark's colleagues. I don't know, maybe you work for him. I don't know, he sounds like he's got a more senior job. Is he scary? Or? Yeah, he's the boss, I think. Anyway, so we have Natalia Ferrea here. She's the product marketing manager for Infobip, and David Boddington, who we heard from earlier. He's the senior product manager for Infobip. So we thought we'd just take the opportunity to ask them a few questions. First one is a very MEF-centric question, because you guys have built a real-life omni-channel experiment for MEF, which was alerts and communications around this event in 3 different channels. So Natalia, why don't you tell us what the thinking was behind that and how that's gone?
Well, the whole thinking was how to make sure that everyone here got the information that they needed in order to know when the sessions were, what was happening, what to look forward to, and everyone likes different mediums, so we offered the choice of having RCS, SMS, or WhatsApp, and in each of those mediums, the person would get alerts whenever a session would come, in the beginning, when it was about to start, and all of those, like all important information throughout the day to make sure that every person that attended here had the best experience possible.
Yeah, and I'll just build up on that. I think Robert talked earlier about drinking your own champagne and eating your own dog food. If we're going to attend an omni-channel event, then let's use omni-channel communications to make sure people know what they need to know, when they need to know it, and on the channel they want to receive it on.
Great. Well, as I understand, I was speaking to Dario earlier. He said we've had some really excellent feedback on that project, and I believe you guys saw Google last night, and they were very complimentary about it. So it seems to have worked. I'm sure we'll do it again in the future. Just to pick up on a few points that were made in the video there. So David, maybe I'll come to you. Obviously, what links all of these omni-channel, there's no point doing any of this omni-channel stuff if you don't have customer data in the background. And it's data that's going to trigger actions, whatever the channel is. So can you talk a little bit about some of the learnings that you've had from doing work with brands on omnichannel and what they do with their data?
Yeah, sure. I think you've kind of picked up 2 important words there. Firstly is the data, but you referenced in terms of taking actions. So for me, for us, it's about actionable data. You can collect as much data as you want. If you don't have that data in order to make a decision, and to take an action yourself, then it becomes meaningless. It becomes white noise. So I think what's important is to make sure you're clear what data you need to capture and how you're going to use it, and that allows you to set in place a strategy in order to do that. I think the Dario referenced earlier, the points around omni-channel versus multi-channel, which I think is kind of a really, really relevant point. My only challenge actually was around the diagram. I think it's not necessarily the person in the middle. I think conceptually it is, but actually from a logical perspective, there needs to be that intelligence layer that sits between the brand and the consumer to understand what action they need to take and how they need to take it, that's driving then the communication out to the consumer.
I would imagine also, aggregators such as Infobip, you have lots of different responsibilities when it comes to data, because I'm sure you need a certain amount of regulatory insight, don't you? Because if you're working with organisations working across multiple regions, what might be possible in Germany might not be possible in Singapore or something. So can you talk a little bit about that, Natalia, or whoever?
Oh, it doesn't. Yeah. Yes, so we need to make sure that the data is compliant, and that Infobip is everywhere around the world, and we need to make sure that it also is industry compliant. So, for example, if we are serving a healthcare in North America, it needs to be HIPAA compliant. And so everything needs to be stored in a very secure way. And it just needs to make sure that it follows all the regulations from different countries, so having different data centers in different countries and etc. But yes, we just need to make sure that everything is data compliant. And by having one platform that is the center of all your data, that already helps quite a lot because everything is unified.
Yeah, and I think there's two main points for me on that. I think firstly, because of the role that we and our contemporaries play, we need to be that authority for our brands because they would expect us to understand that. So we need to be that authority. We need to provide that level of governance. And secondly, it's a company-wide thing. Everyone in the business needed to complete their HIPAA compliance training in order to ensure we are that compliant. So it's not, irrespective of the role you perform, you have a responsibility to understand at an appropriate level what that compliance is. So yes, it's a company-wide thing. It's not down to the legal department, the compliance department.
So, final question is, we've just talked about the fact that data is underpinning all the decisions you're making, all the triggers. Often that's going to the way that that information is going to be aggregated and relayed back to consumers is through a bot. So, again, from your vast experience of working with different enterprises, what have you learned about the best ways to use and set up bots? It's a big question. We could spend a whole hour on it, but if you've got any sort of top-level insights.
I would go a little bit further because it's not, the data needs to feed into all customer service and customer experience. So yes, it needs to be through the bot, so the bot gathering data that comes from the bot is already important, but also making sure that the person has a seamless experience once that moves into customer service. So once you're talking to an agent, that conversation is followed through in a very seamless way, independent on which channel you're talking to them, but also in the future, whenever the company messages you, it's still using all of this data gathered in the bot, with the agent, and with all the interactions that you had on the website, all the interactions that you had with the brand overall, to then feed into messages that the brand is going to send to the consumers. But with the making of the bot itself, it's making sure that the bot is personalized to each person, so it feels a bit more intimate. It doesn't feel very robotic.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to some of the core principles of ensuring that you're providing what the consumer needs or wants, and your best guess is what the consumer needs or wants when they need and want it, and in as accessible a form as possible. So that might be leveraging natural language processing to interpret what the consumer is wanting. It might be ensuring that at the point at which you don't know what they want, you're pushing them to a real person who can interpret what they want. So I think it's about making sure you've done the work at the start to make sure that you're designing and developing your experience ultimately for the consumers as effectively as possible.
Great. Well, as I said, it's a topic it deserves a whole session itself, if not a whole conference itself. But maybe next year for the omni-channel experience that you designed for this session, we'll have a bot. You never know. Anyway, thank you so much to David and Natalia for your comments, and let's move on to the next session. Thank you so much.